The moment is now. Are you ready?
Hello, my name is Damyan. I'm from Bulgaria, and in this video I'm going to show you how to use the give and go and the Richochet tactics. I'm using my most recent setup because I previously created my own setup for this video. So now I'm going to give you some information about the give and go and the Richochet tactics. Give and go is when you offer up one friendly piece in order to lure an opponent's piece out of a specific area or range of space that you want to occupy. Richochet is when your president and your vice president are often nowhere near one another. However, the objective of the move is to give the vice president extended range upon the capture of the president. My opponent accepted my setup, which means he is located into the south with the green pieces and I'm located into the north with the red pieces. After I did the setup and my opponent accepted it, that means my opponent is first to go. Let's play Armis. My opponent is to go now. And he decided to start with moving his vice president deep into the expanse onto the most western space of the board. I'm going to start with placing one of my marine pieces from my setup zone onto the northeastern side of the coastal waters of the Great Sea, so that it will be out of the range of my opponent's marine pieces. My opponent is to go now. I'm trying to gain a control over the coastal waters. He decided to move his marine piece onto the south port, from his setup zone onto the south port, one of his marine pieces. So what I'm going to do now is to move my army next to my vice president in order to be able to cover these two pieces by one another if my opponent eventually decides to move forward, because I have to save my vice president in order to demonstrate you the Richochet tactics. My opponent proceeded with moving his army one block to the north into his setup zone. So now I move my army onto the north port from my setup zone onto the north port because I'm trying to move my vice president deeper into the eastern corridor in order to be able to do the Richochet tactics and to be able to capture my opponent's flag with a few moves with my vice president, which would have been turned into a president. So my opponent moved his marine piece from his setup zone onto a space into the eastern corridor, which is located next to the south port. So my opponent's marine pieces are next to each other. I move my vice president 2 more blocks deeper into the eastern corridor. So these two pieces still cover each other. My opponent decided to move his army from his setup zone into the expanse by moving it 2 blocks to the northwest. This is the exact move. So now I proceed with moving my army from the north port onto a space which is located into the eastern corridor. And now my opponent is to go. I remind the vice president and the army still cover each other. At the same time, they're both covered by my marine piece onto the coastal waters of the Great Sea, and the army is covered by my helicopter. My opponent moved his marine piece 2 blocks deeper into the eastern corridor. He directly sees both of my pieces, my vice president and my army, so I'm going to threaten my opponent's marine piece with moving my vice president 1 more block deeper into the eastern corridor onto the space next to the most eastern space of the board. So now I threaten my opponent's marine piece with my vice president, and at the same time I cover my vice president by my army. I don't think my opponent would like to exchange any of his marine pieces for my vice president or for my army. He immediately moves his marine piece onto the most eastern part of the coastal waters, which is located onto the coastal waters of the Eastern Sea. Now I move my army 1 more block toward my vice president, and with my next move I intend to place my vice president onto the most eastern space of the board. My opponent moved his second marine piece from the south port onto the coastal waters of the Eastern Sea next to his other marine piece. Now I set my vice president in position. My opponent moved his president onto the south port. His president might be a danger, so I will try to lure him. I will show you how now. First, I'm going to start with moving my marine piece onto the opposite side of the coastal waters of the Great Sea, which is the southwestern side of the coastal water of the Great Sea. My opponent is to go now. He decided to move his marine piece onto the coastal waters of the Great Sea. So what I'm going to do now is to try to lure my opponent's president 2 blocks to the southwest back into his setup zone by moving my jet into his setup zone. He might want to capture it with his marine piece onto the coastal waters of the Great Sea, but I don't think he would like to move his marine piece backwards. No, he immediately decided to capture my helicopter. So what I'm going to do now is to set my other marine piece on position if my opponent decides to capture my flag. So I will be able to cover my flag and my reserve with my marine piece. Now I think my opponent would like to capture my jet with his president. Exactly, he captured my jet with his president, and now I'm going to do a second give and go tactic. By capturing my opponent's submarine with my marine piece. And I would like my opponent to capture it with his president. Right? He did it. So what I'm going to do now is to sacrifice my president in order to do the Richochet tactics by moving my president 1-2 blocks toward the expanse from my setup zone into the expanse. So my opponent would probably capture it by either his president or his army. And then my vice president will become a president, and I will be able to capture my opponent's flag with my vice president. He did it. He captured it with his president into the expanse. So my vice president, which I previously set into a position into the eastern corridor, onto the most eastern space of the eastern corridor, now is a president. So I immediately capture my opponent's flag, and the reserve of my opponent was sacrificed. And with my next move, I would capture my opponent's flag, and I should win the game and see the victory sign. My opponent decided to capture my army with the marine piece, which was located onto the most eastern part of the coastal waters of the Eastern Sea. So that's not a obstacle for me. So I just proceed with winning the game. And this is the congratulations sign. Okay, so in this video I showed you how to use the give and go tactics and the Richochet tactics. So thanks for watching, and bye!